I never imagined my own daughter would cut me from her wedding. After losing my wife to cancer when Amelia was just 7, I devoted my life to raising her alone. We weathered every storm together, building a bond I thought was unbreakable. When she got engaged, I proudly agreed to cover her $35,000 dream wedding, wanting to give her the perfect day. But what should have been my proudest moment became my deepest betrayal when I discovered she had secretly decided I was not good enough to walk her down the aisle. Before I tell you how I pulled off the ultimate wedding revenge, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, and hit subscribe to join our storytelling family. Life as a single father in Portland was never easy, but I found my purpose in raising Amelia. After losing Sarah to aggressive breast cancer, I threw myself into being both mom and dad to our little girl. I run a modest construction company that keeps the bills paid, nothing fancy but honest work that supported us through the years. Those early days after Sarah passed were brutal. I remember Amelia crying herself to sleep, asking when Mommy would come back. All I could do was hold her, my own tears falling into her hair, promising I would never leave her. That promise shaped everything I did for 15 years. We created our own traditions to keep moving forward. Every Sunday morning meant chocolate chip pancakes at our favorite diner where the waitresses knew us by name. Each summer we would pack the truck and head to Mount Hood for our annual camping trip, just the two of us beneath the stars, telling stories and making plans. I never missed a school play, a parent-teacher conference, or a soccer game, even if it meant rescheduling jobs or working through the night to make deadlines. Dating was something I put on the back burner. A few women came and went, but whenever things got serious, I always hesitated. Amelia was my priority, and I never wanted her to feel she was competing for my attention or that I was trying to replace her mother. Looking back, maybe that was my first mistake, making her the absolute center of my universe. When Amelia got accepted to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship, I could not have been prouder. We drove to Chicago together, making a road trip adventure of it. Setting up her dorm room was bittersweet. My little girl was spreading her wings, but I knew Sarah would have been so proud. I remember hugging her goodbye, trying not to let her see me cry on the drive back to my empty house. College changed her in ways I did not immediately recognize. Her calls became less frequent, her visits home shorter. She started spending holidays with friends instead of coming home. I told myself this was normal, healthy even, part of growing up and becoming independent. During her junior year, Amelia called me, bubbling with excitement about a boy named Jackson she had met in her economics class. The way she talked about him, his confidence, his ambitions, his family connections, I could hear the stars in her eyes. They became serious quickly, and when she brought him home for Thanksgiving break, I tried to ignore the warning bells in my head. Jackson came from money, serious old East Coast money. His father was an investment banker. His mother came from a family that had streets named after them in Boston. They had vacation homes in Martha's Vineyard and Aspen. Jackson was polite enough, but there was always a subtle condescension in the way he looked around our modest home or asked about my little construction company. Still, he made Amelia happy, and that was what mattered to me. The following Christmas, they announced their engagement over dinner. Amelia was beaming, showing off a diamond that must have cost more than my annual income. When she looked at me with those hopeful eyes and asked if I would help with the wedding, I did not hesitate. Of course, sweetheart, whatever you need. I had been saving for years, originally for her graduate school, but this seemed just as important. $35,000 would stretch me thin, but seeing her happy on her big day would be worth every penny. We spent the next few weeks excitedly discussing venues and themes. We toured garden estates and rustic barns together, debated between summer and fall dates, and I watched her eyes light up, imagining her perfect day. For those few weeks, it felt like I had my little girl back. We were a team again, making plans and sharing dreams. The first cracks appeared when we met Jackson's parents for dinner to discuss the wedding. Diana, Jackson's mother, arrived with a leather-bound wedding planner and immediately took control of the conversation. She talked about country clubs and 5-course meals, designer dresses and society photographers. When I mentioned a beautiful lakeside venue, Amelia and I had visited. Diana smiled tightly and said, "How quaint, but we need to consider the family's reputation." The Blackwell weddings are always featured in social pages. I noticed Amelia's silence, the way she deferred to Diana's opinions, rather than defending our ideas. On the drive home, when I mentioned it, she sighed. "Dad, the Blackwells move in different circles. I just want to fit in with Jackson's family. Is that so wrong?" The next 6 months became a slow-motion heartbreak as I watched my daughter transform into someone I barely recognized. Diana had introduced Amelia to her personal stylist, and suddenly my jeans and sweater girl was wearing designer outfits and speaking with a slightly different accent. When I commented on her new highlights, she mentioned fixing other things about her appearance that the Blackwells thought could use improvement. I still remember the day I realized I was being pushed out. We had plans to visit the top 3 venues on our list, but when I arrived at Amelia's apartment, Diana was already there with her event planner. "Oh, Buck," Diana said with manufactured surprise. "We did not realize you were joining us today. The car is quite full with all of us and the planner's portfolios." Amelia looked at me with apologetic eyes but said nothing. "No problem," I forced myself to say. "You ladies go ahead. Just keep me in the loop." As I walked back to my truck, I heard Diana say, "It is for the best. Men just slow down these decisions anyway." The pattern continued. I would be told about tastings after they happened. Florists were selected without my input. The photographer Diana chose cost twice what we had budgeted, but when I raised concerns about the mounting expenses, Amelia accused me of trying to cheap out on her special day. "Jackson's parents are contributing too, Dad," she said, though I knew from our agreement that I was covering all the major expenses. "They just have better taste in these things." The dress shopping hurt the most. I had always imagined that moment. My daughter trying on wedding gowns, maybe shedding a tear together when she found the perfect one. Instead, I received a text message with a photo of Amelia in a gown that cost $12,000, more than 3 times our budget, with a caption that read, "Diana helped me find the perfect dress. Already put the deposit down, will. Need the rest by next week." By the 1-year mark before the wedding, I had already paid nearly $20,000 in deposits and fees. The venue alone, some historic mansion Diana had selected, required a $10,000 hold. The caterer needed another $5,000 up front, and the florist, photographer, and band each had their own hefty deposits. Still, I kept writing checks, clinging to the hope that my daughter would come to her senses, that this was just a phase of wanting to impress her future in-laws. I started picking up extra jobs on weekends, dipping into my retirement fund, and cutting back on my own expenses to make it work. When I tried to discuss my growing concerns with Amelia, our conversations became increasingly strained. "You just do not understand the pressure I am under," she would say. "Jackson's family has expectations. His cousins all had huge weddings. I cannot embarrass him." "But what about what you wanted?" I would ask. "Remember when you talked about a simple garden ceremony with fairy lights and your favorite local band?" I was being childish, she would reply dismissively. "This is about joining 2 families. The Blackwells have a certain standard to maintain. The bachelor and bachelorette parties were the next blow. I found out about them through social media. Photos of Amelia and her bridesmaids in Las Vegas, staying in some penthouse suite that must have cost thousands per night. I had not even been told it was happening, let alone been asked to contribute to the cost, which I later discovered had been added to the wedding planner's invoices sent to me. 3 months before the wedding, I received an email from the wedding planner requesting the final $15,000 payment to the venue. The email was addressed to wedding financier rather than my name, as if I were nothing but a bank account. When I called Amelia to discuss it, she was distracted and rushed. "Just send it to the account I gave you, Dad. I am late for a dress fitting with Diana. I have not seen you in weeks, Amelia. Could we maybe grab dinner soon? Talk about how things are going. Things are crazy busy right now. Maybe after the honeymoon. I really have to go." 2 months before the wedding, everything fell apart. I was paying bills at my desk when an email notification popped up. The wedding planner had accidentally copied me on a message meant for Diana and Amelia. The subject line read, "Processional order confirmation." My stomach dropped as I opened it. There in black and white was the detailed breakdown of the wedding ceremony. The final line read bride to be escorted down the aisle by Jackson's uncle, federal judge Richard Blackwell. I read it 3 times, unable to process the words. Judge Richard Blackwell, a man I had never even met, would be walking my daughter down the aisle. Not me. Not the father who had raised her alone for 15 years. Not the man who had worked overtime and weekends to give her everything she needed. Not the father who was emptying his savings account to pay for this very wedding. My hands shook as I called Amelia. When she answered, I could barely speak. "Dad, hello. I can barely hear you. I am at lunch with Diana." The processional order I finally managed. "Why is Jackson's uncle walking you down the aisle?" The silence told me everything before she even spoke. "You were not supposed to see that yet," she said quietly. Yet. When exactly were you planning to tell me that I had been replaced in my only daughter's wedding? "The wedding I am paying for, Dad. Please do not make this difficult," she sighed, sounding irritated rather than apologetic. Judge Blackwell is very respected in their community. Having him escort me shows the Blackwells that I understand their family traditions. "It is just symbolic. Just symbolic." My voice cracked. "Like the 15 years I spent raising you alone was just symbolic. You are still invited to the wedding," she said, as if offering a consolation prize. "You will still be seated in the front row as the father of the bride." "How generous," I whispered, feeling something break inside me. "To be invited to the wedding I am paying for. Jackson's family needs to see me as part of their world." She continued, her voice hardening. "This is about my future. Why can you not understand that? Why do you have to be so selfish?" I hung up without another word. That night I sat alone in my workshop, the place where I had built Amelia's dollhouse, her bookshelf, the hope chest I had planned to give her as a wedding present. I looked at the photographs on my workbench, teaching her to ride a bike, hugging her at high school graduation, the 2 of us covered in flour after a disastrous attempt at baking Sarah's favorite cookies. And I made a decision. The next morning I called my family attorney. "Mark, if I signed the contracts and made the deposits for a wedding venue and vendors legally, who controls those agreements?" "You do," he said without hesitation. "If your name is on the contracts and you made the payments, you have the right to modify or cancel those services." I pulled out every wedding-related document I had, contracts, invoices, email confirmations, and created a spreadsheet of each vendor, the amounts paid, and their cancellation policies. Most required 2 weeks' notice to cancel, without additional penalties. I was still within the window. Then I drafted a carefully worded email to each vendor, explaining that due to unforeseen circumstances, the wedding was being canceled. I offered to forfeit the deposits already paid, but requested that no additional charges be applied. I asked for written confirmation of the cancellations and emphasized the need for discretion. One by one, the responses came in. The venue was understanding. Apparently, they had dealt with canceled weddings before and agreed to keep my deposit as full settlement. The caterer was similarly accommodating. The florist hesitated, initially mentioning non-refundable special order flowers, but agreed when I offered an additional $500 to cover their costs. The photographer was trickier. He had blocked off the entire weekend and turned down other jobs. We negotiated a cancellation fee that seemed fair. The band, the rental company, the transportation service. One by one, I methodically unwound every arrangement. With each cancellation email I sent, I felt a confusing mix of emotions. The deep ache of betrayal alongside a growing sense of reclaiming my dignity. I was not just Amelia's ATM. I was her father, and if she could not respect that relationship, I would not fund its erasure. The wedding planner was the final call. She was clearly shocked. "Mr. Harrington, I do not understand. The wedding is only 8 days away. Everything is finalized." "Not anymore," I said simply. "I have canceled all the services I contracted. The deposits will cover any fees. But what about your daughter? Does Amelia know about this?" "She will soon enough," I replied. "And please, when she calls you, make it clear that this was my decision, not yours. I do not want your business to suffer because of our family situation." After hanging up, I turned off my phone, poured myself a whiskey, and sat on my back porch watching the sunset. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of peace. The weight of financing a wedding where I was unwanted had been replaced by the cleaner pain of acknowledging what my relationship with Amelia had become. The next day I boxed up all of Amelia's childhood photos and mementos that decorated my house and stored them in the attic. Looking at her innocent face from years past was too painful now. I needed to separate the daughter I had raised from the woman who had decided I was not good enough to stand beside her. On what would have been the wedding day, I drove to a quiet bar on the other side of town, ordered a beer, and waited. My phone, which I had finally turned back on, began buzzing around 11 in the morning, exactly when Amelia would have arrived at the venue to begin preparations. 27 missed calls and 43 text messages flooded in over the next hour. I did not read them all, but the snippets were enough. "What did you do? The venue is locked. Dad, answer your phone. How could you do this to me?" Around noon, I finally answered her call. "How could you?" She screamed, her voice raw. "Everyone is here. Jackson's entire family. My friends from across the country. The venue says you canceled everything." "Yes," I said calmly. "I did." "Why? Why would you ruin the most important day of my life?" "Because it stopped being about your life, Amelia. It became about becoming someone the Blackwells would approve of, even if that meant cutting out the person who raised you. So this is revenge, because you were not walking me down the aisle." "No," I said quietly. "This is a consequence. You decided I was not good enough to stand beside you, but my money was still good enough to pay for everything. That is not how respect works. I will never forgive you for this," she spat. "Never." "I know," I replied, feeling the finality of it. "I have accepted that. Just like you will have to accept that actions have consequences. I love you, Amelia. I always will. But I deserve better than what you were willing to give me." I hung up and ordered another beer. According to friends who later told me what happened, the scene at the venue was chaos. Diana Blackwell had tried to leverage her social connections to secure last-minute alternatives, but with no success. Jackson's family blamed Amelia for not managing her father properly. Some guests had already posted about the disaster on social media, turning their personal crisis into viral entertainment. 2 days later, I heard through mutual friends that Amelia and Jackson had gotten married at the courthouse with a small reception at his parents' country club, paid for by the Blackwells, of course. The 6 months that followed were the hardest of my life, even more difficult than losing Sarah. At least with Sarah's death, I had Amelia to focus on, a reason to get out of bed each morning. Now I felt completely alone. Friends took sides, with many blaming me for what they saw as a vindictive act. I lost business contacts who were connected to the Blackwells. I started drinking too much, sleeping too little. It was my oldest friend, Mike, who finally pulled me out of the spiral. He showed up at my house unannounced on a Sunday morning, when I had not answered his calls for 3 days straight. "You look like hell," he said, pushing past me and opening curtains that had been closed for weeks. "Enough wallowing. Get in the shower. We are going fishing." On the lake that day, with no cell reception and nowhere to run, I finally broke down and told him everything. Not just about the wedding, but about the years of slowly losing my daughter to people who looked down on me and everything I had built. "You know," Mike said after listening for hours, "my brother went through something similar with his son. Got involved with a rich girlfriend who thought his plumbing business was beneath her. He joined this support group for parents dealing with adult children issues. Might be worth checking out." The group turned out to be a lifeline. Meeting other parents who had experienced rejection, manipulation, or estrangement from their adult children helped me understand that what had happened was not entirely my fault. I learned about healthy boundaries, about enabling behaviors I had engaged in, without realizing it, about the difference between loving my daughter and allowing her to treat me with disrespect. I redirected the wedding money I had left, about $12,000, to a charity that supported children who had lost parents to cancer. It felt like honoring Sarah, while also closing this painful chapter. Slowly, I started rebuilding my life. I focused on my business, reconnected with old friends, even started dating a kind widow I met through my community volunteer work. Denise understood loss in a way few people could, and her warmth helped heal parts of me I thought were permanently broken. Almost exactly 1 year after the canceled wedding, my doorbell rang on a rainy Sunday afternoon. I opened it to find Amelia, standing there soaking wet and looking nothing like the polished socialite she had become. Her makeup was streaked, her hair unstyled. "Can I come in?" she asked in a small voice I had not heard since she was a child afraid of thunderstorms. We sat in uncomfortable silence at the kitchen table, where we had once shared thousands of meals. Finally, she spoke. "Jackson and I are getting divorced," she said flatly. 6 months was enough to realize we wanted different things. I waited, offering neither sympathy nor judgment. "His family," she continued. "They never really accepted me. Not fully. I was always the outsider trying to prove I belonged. After the wedding disaster, they blamed me. Said I should have managed you better." She laughed bitterly. "As if you were some pet that needed training rather than my father." "Is that why you are here?" I asked carefully. "Because his family rejected you." "No," she said, looking me in the eye for the first time. "I am here because I have spent a year thinking about what happened. About the choices I made. About how I treated the one person who had always been there for me." She pulled out her phone and showed me photos of the courthouse wedding. "Look at my face in these pictures. I am smiling, but my eyes are dead. I kept thinking about all our dreams for my wedding day. The simple, meaningful celebration we had planned together before the Blackwells took over. Before I let them take over. It hurt," I admitted. "More than anything in my life." "I know," she whispered. "And I am not asking for forgiveness. Not yet. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did, how I betrayed you, and that I am sorry." We talked for hours that afternoon. Really talked in ways we had not in years. About her marriage and divorce, about my cancellation of the wedding, about the ways we had both made mistakes. She had been seduced by wealth and status. I had enabled her entitled behavior for years, by always putting her first without expecting respect in return. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. "Can I call you sometime? Maybe we could get coffee, I would like," that I said honestly. Our reconciliation did not happen overnight. We started with occasional text messages, then coffee every few weeks. We established new boundaries. I made it clear that respect was non-negotiable, and she learned to accept my new relationship with Denise. I supported her efforts to finish her master's degree and find her own path apart from the influence of the Blackwells. Looking back now, 2 years later, I realized that sometimes love requires the courage to allow consequences. By canceling that wedding, I was not just acting out of hurt or revenge. I was finally setting a boundary that should have been established long ago. I was saying that my dignity had value, that being a parent did not mean being a doormat. Amelia and I still have our difficult moments, but our relationship now is built on mutual respect, rather than just the roles of father and daughter. She has apologized many times for what happened, but the true healing came when she stopped seeking external validation and started valuing authentic connections again. If there is one thing I have learned through this painful journey, it is that we teach people how to treat us by what we accept, what we allow, and what we enable. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not giving someone everything they want, but showing them that relationships require reciprocity and respect. The money I would have spent on that wedding has now funded 3 scholarships for children who lost parents to cancer. When the first recipient sent me a thank you letter, I cried, knowing that Sarah would have been proud of this outcome, that something beautiful had emerged from the ashes of such pain. So here is my question for you. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you loved? How did it change your relationship? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Remember that sometimes the most important gift we can give ourselves is the courage to say no more when someone crosses our boundaries. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the strength to protect your own worth in all your relationships.